The new deck recipes for Rise of Shadows are here, including crazy decks like this Thief Rogue, and I want to walk through them.
Hey, buddy, watch this.
That's right, guys. Patch hit today, and we can take a look at some of the deck recipes that Blizzard crafted utilizing new Rise of Shadows cards. It's kind of crazy how many of these are already lining up really closely to decks I've been theory crafting. That's a cool sign. But I'm going to go through each class here and look at both of their deck recipes, both the new one that's dedicated to Rise of Shadows, but also the updated versions are going to have new cards as well. So let's start off with Warrior here in the top left and take a look at Droppin' the Boom. This is a new Dimensional Ripper, Boom Reaver themed kind of big warrior deck. It doesn't run that many new cards, right? Only 5 total slots in the deck, but really only 3 new cards. But you've got some really big stuff with Dimensional Ripper, so you can summon big minions and do cool things with them. Now, they went like a beast route here with Undasta, Akali the Rhino, Amani Warbear, even Witchwood Grizzlies. This is something we talked about when we built a pretty similar list myself on stream. I didn't really think the beasts were going to be good enough, but I do like this full package. I mean, Grizzly and Amani Warbear give you some things to play on their own. They're pretty good, but also still solid off of Dimensional Ripper. But my challenge for this deck right now is there are 10 cards at that 7+ slot. I don't know if this deck ever gets to Dimensional Ripper or Boom Reaver. It seems like it's going to die in the meantime. It has some early game removal, but I'm not sure there's enough card draw or early game stuff. Plus, your Sweeping Strikes is dead until the late game anyway. So this is a card that, even though it's a 2-drop, it's not really a 2-drop. To me, this deck looks way too slow. I feel like you're just going to get ran over. And I don't know that like Grizzly and Ziliax are going to give you time to catch up. To me, I think this got a little bit too greedy and is probably not going to work all that well. But it's a cool idea, and maybe if the meta's slow enough, it could get there. That said, let's take a look at Wings of War here for Warrior. This is a dragon deck from the previous expansion, right? But it's been updated with Proud Defender and Barista Lynchen, which clearly we've got some dragons with some cool battle cries, right? Even War Master Voon here, you can copy and get even more dragons. The dragons themselves, like Emberscale Drake, have some good battle cries. So I can see that adding some extra value. I think the challenge for this deck, though, is that it already has a lot of value. With cards like Dragon Roar and War Master Voon, you're already running like an excess of cards. Do you need even more ways to add even more value to your hand? That's a question that I don't have an answer for. I think Proud Defender is like a fine inclusion, but I don't really know that it's better than just like a 4-drop dragon. Would you rather maybe just have like a Twilight Drake in that spot? So still some issues with this deck. I don't think it was ever very good before, and I don't think it's going to remain great either now moving forward. So a couple inclusions, but not really changing much in a positive direction as far as I'm concerned. So now let's head over to Shaman and see what Shaman's got in store with the new Underbelly Underlings. This is clearly going to be a Murloc-themed deck. Got a lot of new Murloc cards: Sludge Slurper, Toxfin, Soul the Murloc, Underbelly Angler, and Scargill, and a pretty predictable Murloc package surrounding them. This is eerily similar to a Warlock deck I built as far as the Murloc package is concerned. But the one thing this deck doesn't have that I think would be cool is a Hagatha. I added a Hagatha into mine to give this sort of a more late game angle. I know that's not traditionally what you want to do with Murlocs, but because of Scargill and Underbelly Angler, I think this deck has the ability to generate resources and reload enough that it can kind of play to that mid to late game scenario. And I think a Hagatha tossed in could give it that extra depth. This one's a little bit more all in on 1 or 2 big early pushes, maybe just 1 good reload, because you're not going to have that many cards, even if you hit Underbelly Angler and Scargill perfectly. Like, you just can't reload that hard or extract that much value when there's this many 1-drops, right, looking at this curve. That said, it still does look pretty fast, and I'm sure this will absolutely be able to just steal some games with raw just aggression and hitting the Bloodlust at the right time. So, I mean, this will be a great deck for the Whizbang pool that will win people some games. I don't think this is what an eventual Murloc Shaman at a competitive level will probably end up looking like. It seems a little bit too singular and narrow in its design to me. Particularly don't like cards like Murloc Raider all that much. The more 1-mana Murlocs you have, the worse Scargill gets in a way, right? So, couple challenges maybe for this one, but ultimately still a winnable deck. That said, let's take a look at Swamp of Horror here. This is the like Hagatha deck from a previous set. I guess it has like just big spell stuff. I don't know, it's kind of all over the place, like a spell Hagatha deck. I don't know exactly what the theme here is supposed to be, but regardless, this deck has added in a neat little package with Muck Morpher into Big Bad Archmage. So you have, yeah, I see it now. Okay, so it's like a Muck Morpher Big Shaman, essentially, where your Muck Morpher is always turning into something cool. You're either getting a Ziliax, an Alakir, a Walking Fountain, or a Big Bad Archmage, all of which are probably good. I mean, the Ziliax is not amazing necessarily. 4/4 Ziliax is fine, but it's not super high rolly. But the rest, you're going to be pretty excited. Oh, Ysera as well, I see. So it's just a big shaman, basically, with early game spells to help you stay alive and contest. I think this is a cool idea. Eureka's in there as well to get some of these big minions out faster and more efficiently. So that's cool. Hagatha for the late game value, too. This deck looks really neat. I like this deck a lot. I think this is probably going to lose a lot of games in the early game still, because most of these things, if you look in the early game, like they're there as far as curve is concerned, but they're like, this is a minion support card. This is a minion support card. These are only good in the late game. These are just like helping you find things. They're not necessarily answers. So you're probably going to get ran over a ton. And although you have a lot of big late game plays, you're going to have these hands that are just totally dead. You're probably not going to stabilize in time. You don't really start moving till turn 5 plus. So this deck probably gets run over, I'm sure. Despite looking like the curve's not terrible, it's actually pretty bad because 4 of your early game cards don't work at all until the late game. So you're basically hitting the totem button a lot. That means this deck is going to lose a ton of games, but I think the idea is fun if the execution's not perfect. So that said, let's go take a look at Rogue up next. This one's pretty cool, I'm sure, because we got some new Thief Rogue shenanigans with the Heist. It's a cool name. Tack, Nazwisker, Vendetta, Hinge Clan Burglar, Underbelly Fence, and Togwaggle Scheme. Kind of the most obvious package here of the new Thief cards. Tack in particular is kind of cool with academic espionage and preparation stuff. Draw yourself a bunch of cards. Also, Togwaggle Scheme, you can draw yourself a bunch of cards while still generating tons of in-deck value. Notably, this is only running 1 academic espionage. That's intriguing, but it does have the Face Collector and the new Hinge Clan Burglar, so it's a little bit better in the mirror matches, I'm sure, because you've got multiple ways to generate minions that are not rogue, or cards that are not rogue cards, in some cases, minions with Face Collector. That said, it's not running a weapon. There's no Spectral Cutlass here, so I don't know that you're as dependent, perhaps, on cards from other classes. It's really just your Underbelly Fence and your Tess that are going to get empowered by that. So this deck does feel a little bit all over the place to me. It does run the Pilfer to make your Underbelly Fence more consistent on turn 1. Also, Preparation into Academic Espionage can help you get that Fence running as well. So it's got like some tempo aspects with Argent Squires and Eviscerates and Edwins and SIs combined with some Thief stuff. I like the idea of not diving too deep into the value Thief trap and maintaining some tempo, but it still doesn't feel like it's doing either all that well, and it's kind of maybe making sacrifices for both. So I wonder if this card really ever gets there. Like, is it doing enough tempo to rush down your opponent, or enough damage, or enough threats? Alternatively, is it generating enough value to go long against control? I feel like it's probably somewhere in the middle, gapping each of those, and I think a more refined list will eventually be the right way to play Tack and some of these new Thief-style cards. But this is a cool start, and I think this is definitely a deck that's capable of winning games in the Whiz-Bang pool, which is a good thing. Now we can take a look at Cursed Crew. This has barely been updated at all, it looks like. Just the Hinge Clan Burglar here, added in as a new pirate. I don't know that this actually fits the deck all that well. It's cool off Hook Tusk because it's a pretty big minion, but it's not the highest tempo card. It's really more about resource generation than impacting the board immediately. So I feel like it doesn't really fit in all that well despite being a pirate. I think you'd almost always rather play Ticket Scalper or just something that's more influential and impactful immediately. So interesting little update, but probably not significant. Now, I don't know what this replaced, so it may be better than the previous version, or for all I know, these decks change a lot. I don't know the exact previous lists. Some of you guys out there might, but nonetheless, just looking at it in and of itself, it's still a solid little tempo pirate deck. This won't make it a bad deck by any means. Maybe not the most necessary inclusion or update, but still a pretty good deck. So that said, let's move on to Paladin. I'm sure we're going to have a new secret Paladin. Indeed, it looks like we will. The Sun Reaver's Secrets here. And this is ridiculously similar to a list I built. I mean, my God, it might be almost card to card the same. It is absurdly close. I don't know that I had a couple of these cards in here, but Mask Contender, I think we had Blessing of Kings, very, very close to my list. So clearly the new secret cards are in support here. Rissa, Sunreaver Spy, Materius Blade, and Never Surrender. Now, interestingly, we do not have Desperate Measures in this deck. That's the new 1-mana spell that gives you a couple secrets, the Twin Spell card, a couple random secrets. That makes sense in some ways because that doesn't help your Secret Keeper much, right? But I do think that card's still really good with Rissa and just making sure you have enough secrets off Spy. But they decided not to run that, which is interesting. Also, the secret package here, we got the new secret, Noble Sack, Auto Defense, so pretty standard secret package. Nothing too surprising there. And some, finishers in the late game, a lot of damage. So this one's looking to be very aggressive and going all in. It does not have a lot of card draw or like late game. There's no like Prince Liam in there or anything to like buy you some extra depth in your deck. This is sort of an all-in version of the deck. I'm worried without Divine Favor, this is going to just peter out against a lot of things. And although it will certainly steal some games occasionally for people who just don't have answers, I don't think this will be the most consistent version of the deck because it probably goes a little bit too all in, too fast, too hard, and can't ever really reload or go into longer game plans. And that'll probably be an issue for it. That said, let's move over to Shirvala's Chosen. Here we have what is this? Sort of a heal control paladin. It's got Immortal Prelates and Shirvala, Countess Ashmore. A lot of heal cards, but no like OTK stuff or anything. It's really just a Thakal support piece that's all about generating a lot of life gain and long-term survivability. I think probably playing towards Immortal Prelates for a late-game win condition. You can buff them with Sound the Bells, and you got Spirit of the Tigers there for your buffs as well. Not too many big spells for your Spirit of the Tigers. You got some Lay on Hands and New Challenger, but not like... well, I guess Spikered Steed is gone, so Blessing of Kings is there, so kind of making do with what you've got. But... also some new healing cards with Lightforged Blessing. I don't really think this is going to be good. Like, it is interesting with Immortal Prelate because you keep that lifesteal on there, and potentially this becomes a big lifestealy kind of thing all the time. That's nice, keeps you alive, but still worry about it. Call to Adventure, I guess, also helps you find your Immortal Prelate, which is pretty cool because once you play a Kangor, Immortal Prelate's going to be one of your cheapest minions with your Wild Pyros. So that's a good way to dig and buff your Immortal Prelate. So I really like that. That's a cool little combo. I don't know if this is the best way to support it, but it's a neat idea. So this deck feels a little all over the place. I don't think this will be a particularly good list, but it has some nice little packages that work well together. So this might be a deck I try to build and do a better version of it. So it's okay, but I'm not thinking it's great. So now let's take a look at Hunter. We're halfway through here. And Hunter, we have the Scrap Heap, a new Death Rattle Mech Hunter deck. And in fact, it's a pretty aggressively curved deck. This is not what I would expect for an Oblivitron deck. Oblivitron itself is not very aggressive, and you kind of have to hit the right sort of minions in hand to make this good, because if you get a Mecharoo off your Oblivitron, I feel like you're pretty disappointed. That's suddenly a kind of bad card, but you've still got Mecharoos in there, and you've got... Venomizers that can come off your Oblivitron. You've got Spider Bomb, which is fine. Ursatron's probably okay. Menace, I mean, not a good Oblivitron card, but probably not the end of the world. You're okay if you get a replicating Menace. So that makes sense. It's also just a good magnetic card. So really more of a kind of tempo mech deck than a full-on Oblivitron late game Death Rattle synergy deck. Which, that still makes sense. That's fine. A lot of weird little things like Secret Plans just kind of tossed in there. That's for the Zul'jin, I'm sure. Spring Paw is just kind of tossed in there without support. Those sorts of things make me nervous. I feel like if you're running Spring Paw, you almost have to have Hyena, even if there's not a lot of other direct support for it. So interesting inclusions here and there, things that don't feel super optimized to me. But there is a nice Zul'jin package with Unleash the Beast, and 9 lives is pretty cool off Zul'jin. Animal Companion, Bomb Toss, some of these make sense. Secret Plan will give you secrets, which is cool. So, yeah, I mean, it's fine. I don't think this is doing either of its things very well. It's not a great, tempo mech deck or hunter deck. I think you'd just be better off with, a mid-range hunter beastless. It's also probably not a great, Oblivitron support deck or a great Zul'jin deck, but it's doing a few things okay, and that's probably enough to win you some games. That said, let's move over to Animal Instincts here. This one's been updated too, of course. Shimmerfly and Hinch Clan Hogsteed being added into what is pretty much just a mid-range hunter list. that has some Halazi and Spirit of the Lynx action for Rosticon's Rumble. And yeah, I mean, these are fine changes. Shimmerfly just adds into the Spring Paw pool. It's a new 1 mana beast, which is really nice. I think to empower your Scavenging Hyena. Hinchclan Hogseed also good for Hyena, just an early beast that's nice with Direwolf Alphas and Timberwolves and so on. So another really good fit for Hunter there. I think these are two very easy, simple updates that will make this a pretty solid mid-range Hunter deck. I honestly think if you cut Spirit of the Lynx and Halazi of the Lynx, you'd have a better package. But of course, this deck's kind of built to showcase these together, and I think it can do that in a fairly successful way. So yeah, this will certainly win some games. So now let's take a look at Druid, and I think we're going to have a heal Druid deck here. Nature's Restoration, Resto Druid is here. Loosened Bark, Crystal Stag, Life Weaver, Dreamway Guardians, and Crystal Power in here are the new cards. We've got some heal synergy stuff. Crystal Stag in particular is pretty intriguing. Loosened Bark, I guess if you can make him work, is nice. This deck also, like me, went for the Faceless Manipulator Forbiddeness Floop route for Loosened Bark to presumably get tons of Loosened Barks, but it's got some interesting things in here I didn't include. Starfall, we did include Blade Master and Farseer, at least talked about it. I don't know if I landed on Blade Master eventually or not, but that's cool. They do not have Steladris in this deck, but you got some things like Blood Mage, Crystallizer to take some damage. Nourish is for card draw or potentially ramp, but probably card draw. Lore for another healing option. I kind of feel like this deck is not doing any of its things particularly well. And so in other words, like, you can get a few Loosened Barks, but there may not be enough big ways to heal. You've got Farseer, you've got Crystal Power, Lore. There's not quite enough healing, I feel like. Also, is there enough ways for you to take damage that you even need the healing? I don't know. Life Weaver is, I feel like, a bit of a greedy card, but maybe not because you can get a lot of spells out of it. But it doesn't help support the main package all that much. This one just feels a little all over the place to me. I don't know that it's going to get there and that Loosened Bark's going to be the kind of treasure at the end of the rainbow for this deck, but I don't know if it's that big of a treasure, and I don't know if the rainbow's looking all that good on the way. So this one feels a little all over the place, and I don't think it's going to be great. This almost certainly will not look like the final version of this deck, I'm sure, if there is a competitive version. But, you got to play these things to see, so maybe it still does some cool things. And then alternatively, we can look at Trees, our friends here. We have another token Druid support card, going back to Tree Ant synergies with the Forest Aid here, generating you a lot of Tree Ants. Also, Blessing of the Agents, giving you some token buffs. Dreamway Guardians are more tokens, and Acorn Bear also generating you some tokens. Not all of these are trees, but they are all tokens, so just a lot of reload potential in this deck. Fair bit of follow-up with Savage Roar, Blessing of the Ancients, Power of the Wild. So yeah, I mean, this deck is cool. I think a lot of these plays are kind of mediocre, and only one Soul of the Forest is really intriguing to me. I think that would be one of the more important cards in the deck, so that's odd. A couple mediocre things to be done here, and still, though, capable of winning games, absolutely. A lot of reloads, some outright damage and pressure is always possible. Mulch Muncher is kind of cool if it works. So, sure, I think this deck is fine. Again, I don't think this will be what the final version of a Token Druid looks like. I think it'll be much more refined than this, and there's a lot of kind of throwaway cards in here. But this is a competitive whiz-bang deck as far as I'm concerned, with some neat new additions from Rise of Shadows. So now let's move on to the final three classes here. Up first is Warlock and Ultimate Infestation, which is a triggering and awesome name. And clearly this is going to be a Demon Imp style deck to empower your Jumbo Imp, also your Sea Giant kind of doing the same thing. And we're going to have a lot of cards that summon a ton of imps. Hinchclan Hag, Fiendish Circle, Reform Scheme, Inferno, buffing your imps, and a lot of demon and sort of token synergy cards here in the early game. I like the hyper-aggressive curve of this. I think it's going to be really dependent on hitting your imp and your Sea Giant at the right times to make sure you have the depth necessary to win. I do think Reform Scheme is actually pretty bad in this, even though it seems to fit the game plan well. It's just such a weak top deck. I think Fiendish Circle is just more consistent and does what you want more. So this is likely going to be worse than just building more towards Zoo in my mind. I think you could probably build a better just raw Zoo deck than going super hard into imps. But there's a lot of things to like here. I'd cut Blood Imp, I would cut Reform Scheme and try to add in a few more just consistent Zoo style cards. Maybe make that curve a little better, maybe a 5-drop or 2. So those sorts of things. Not even sure Jumbo Wimp's going to be worth it, but it might be, so it's certainly fine to consider. And this deck will absolutely be capable of winning games in Whizbang. This is a solid deck, I would imagine, but not perfect yet again. And moving on, let's take a look at Hand of Gul'dan. Here we have like a control warlock, kind of a hand lock, I'll guess, by the name implication. And Proud Defender makes the cut. Interesting. Okay, that's been in a couple decks now. That surprises me. Maybe Blizzard likes this card more than I do. I don't think this is going to be good enough personally. But otherwise, we have Twilight Drake. We have Mountain Giant, so our big hand style cards. We've got Rafam in here to turn maybe some weak cards in the late game into bigger threats if you have to go into a long control matchup. Omega Agent's also in here, which is intriguing. I'm surprised we don't see Faceless Rager in this deck. I think that would be a cool addition to work well with your Twilight Drakes and your Mountain Giants. I think that could be a neat little package. It's also just really cool with Sun Fury Protector in that package. So Faceless Manipulator is kind of the same, but wouldn't be shocked to see Faceless Ragers in that spot instead. Even with Doomsayer, it's kind of intriguing, right? Like, you wouldn't normally want to use it that way because it died to your Doomsayer, but it's like, if you gave both of them Taunt or something, that could be a really good defensive play. So any of these high health minions work really nicely with it. Again, not an optimized list, I'm sure. I don't think Farseer is the kind of card that makes the cut. Omega Agent, there's nothing wrong with it, but I'm sure there are better options. So, close to being a cool hand lock control deck, but I'm sure a few refining points here and there would be nice. That said, still very capable of winning games, I'm sure, in the Whizbang pool. Moving on here, let's move to Mage. Getting close to the end. Mage, Archmages of Dalaran is the first deck. This is definitely a tempo Mage, and again, this one looks really similar to one that I built myself. Few different cards like Thalnos and I don't think I had a Spell Zerker in my deck, but everything else looks really similar, including Elemental Evocation in here, which is a really cool combination with Mana Cyclone. It adds an extra spell, also makes Mana Cyclone cheaper, so you can play all of that together and get a ton of cards back in your hand. Also, Cosmic Anomaly there for the Evocation Antonitis to turn all these spells into even more value potentially in the late game. And then, of course, your main engine is going to be your Apprentice and your Dart Frog, playing tons of cheap spells, clearing your opponent's board and setting yourself up for tons of damage with Fireballs and Anomalies and Cinderstorms and so on and so forth. And you've got card generation and draw via Luna and Cyclone. I mean, this is exactly the sort of build I envision too. Just a couple different cards here and there. So, great looking deck. I don't know if it's going to be good enough. This one doesn't have Hexcrow, which I ran. I thought that might be a nice mid-game power, but apparently Blizzard's thinking you don't need it, which I totally believe. I think this could end up being better than the version I built. Maybe Spellzerker just makes more sense to make these spells more impactful along the way, and you've got enough reach and damage anyway, so why bother? I believe it, so I like this list a lot. I think this is close to how I would build the real version of the deck, and maybe it will end up being pretty similar to the real version, so this is a strong one. That said, let's move on to Khadgar's Creations here. Very cool Khadgar deck showing up. This is awesome. Khadgar, Ray of Frost, Conjurer's Calling, Messenger Raven, Power of Creation, and Calico. So this is straight up just like a control hand mage. Conjurer's Calling is in here, but honestly, there's not that many sort of synergy cards with it. Things that are like bad minions themselves that you're happy to destroy to get duplicate copies. I mean, granted, any minion with Khadgar and Conjurer's Calling is a cool combo, but I thought we might see more egg-style stuff. You really don't, though. So Conjurer's Calling, I'm worried it's not going to be great in this deck, you know? It's not a lot of minion targets for it. It seems kind of odd. Not enough support, but maybe it just feels fine with Khadgar anyway. Maybe you just destroy your Calicos or your whatever random thing you get off Power of Creation or something, or, you know, just Khadgar being there is enough. Now, Power Creation plus Khadgar is obviously cool. That's great news. Hexlord Malacras is there to just generate extra resources. Seems a little greedy, but probably fine. A lot of control tools in this deck, which is nice. Frost Nova Doomsayer even. It's cool that they were willing to do that and not lean too hard into the summoning package. So, yeah, I mean, this looks like a pretty cool control mage. I'm a little worried about depth and, like, support for Khadgar and Power of Creation. Some of these seem like they might be a little too dependent on one another, particularly Conjurer's Calling. I just don't really understand. Maybe it's a one-of anyway, so maybe they're not being too reliant on it. But an interesting look at Control Mage. I'm sure just because it has good Control Mage cards, it's still going to be competitive to some extent. So a solid little deck. And now finally, one last class here with Priest. I can't believe it. We've run through these pretty quickly. This is Day of the Dead for Priest, a Katrina Muerte. Let me say that again. Katrina Muerte. Resurrect deck with Mass Resurrection, Batterhead, Hinchclan, Shadequill, Forbidden Words. Interesting. So this has some Auchenai Circle stuff. Like Shadequill is good with Circle and Auchenai. We've experimented with that. Blade Master Circle is there. Your Northshire Cleric to draw you a lot of cards. So ultimately, it's just a Resurrect deck that's putting good res minions in the pool. You want big Blade Masters, big Shadequills, big Grizzlies, Stegatrons that are big when they get rezzed. Batterhead, I don't like, to be honest. I get why it's there. It's cool off of a Resurrect. Ultimately, what I see here is a deck that has a lot of control tools and a lot of mid-game threats that's going to be trying to resummon those in the late game and win with things like Topsy-Turvy, perhaps, and Divine Spirit. Kind of like what we see with Wall Priest today, just a little bit of a different take on it, right? But very similar style of cards. That said, I think a more traditional Wall Priest that's super control-oriented and then just plays for a very specific in-game board is probably going to be better than this sort of mid-rangey version that's been built here. I feel like this is putting too many bad minions in your pool, like Auchenai Soul Priest, for instance, that might not just combo well with your end-game state with Divine Spirit Topsy-Turvy. So I would probably just shift this more traditionally. I mean, Katrina Muerte is probably fine anyway, because she's going to summon some awesome big taunts and stuff. Now, that said, this deck looks good to me. It doesn't look terrible. It's got some components that work, but again, probably not the perfect end version of what this sort of deck would look like in the new meta. That said, let's move over to Whispers from the Grave. Here we have a Undertaker Death Rattle deck with a lot of Death Rattles, some of which don't really make sense. Hinchclan, Shadequill, and Undertaker, not a combination I would typically expect to see. Although, that said, we do have an Auchenai Phantasm here. Is there some kind of crazy combo that this is building towards? Wait a minute here. Are you trying to get, like, an Auchenai Phantasm Undertaker Coffin Crasher scenario going or something? I don't know. That sounds a little bit too complicated. I'm not seeing a direct line to that or any sort of immediate obvious combo. So maybe it's just the opportunity for all these things to work together. That said, it seems like you have way too many Death Rattles in the pool here to make Undertaker good, right? Things like Dead Ringer and Hinchclan Shadequill don't really support the kind of value you'd expect from Undertaker. So, I mean, it looks okay, this deck, but it seems like it's all over the place. A lot of your 2-drops, like Shadowy Figure, it's not really a 2-drop, so the early game here feels a little weird because Auchenai Phantasm's probably not a 2-drop either most of the time. So, Curve is late game. It's got some cool things that can happen in the mid to late game, like big scary minions, but at the end of the day, I don't really know where I'm going with this deck or what exactly I'm trying to do. This just feels sort of haphazard Death Rattle theme. Maybe I'm missing some key connecting component, I'm not sure, some combo, but ultimately it looks like an inconsistent, weird, kind of mid-range Death Rattle deck that probably doesn't have a great way to win games and often just has a lot of cards in hand that don't necessarily go together. This is an intriguing deck, but I don't think it's great, but it could probably win a game from time to time. And that said, we have taken a look here at all of the new deck recipes for Rise of Shadows. Those are pretty cool. I don't know what the best one is. It's kind of impossible to guess right now, right? We're totally in a new meta soon, but nonetheless, those were pretty fun decks, and I think a lot of them were competitive. I feel like Whizbang's going to look solid, particularly in this new meta where there's probably not going to be any super defining decks. There's just not that many good cards right now in the game. I mean, that's always contextual, and clearly the best cards are the best cards in any given meta, but I don't think it's going to be like dominant archetype that's just overrunning the meta. So Whizbang decks might have more of a chance to shine than they have in the past, especially because some of these looked like exactly the way I'd build them. Not to say I'm the best, but seems like they are at least competitive. All that said, if you guys have any thoughts on these decks, of course, I want to hear your take on all of these too. Which ones you're most excited to see, which ones you think are built correctly, anything I missed, any cool combos, that sort of stuff. Share all that in the comments below as always. But until then, thank you so very much for watching. And until next time, game on.